Back in 1789, James Madison actually wrote this rule designed to stop members of Congress from, well, basically messing with their own paychecks.
Right.
And that rule was just promptly shoved into a metaphorical drawer where it sat gathering dust for, I don't know, over 200 years.
203 years, to be exact. I mean, it wasn't actually ratified until 1992.
Right, yeah. And today, we're going to look at how a 2026 senator is using that exact same ghost of James Madison to try and navigate the politics of a government shutdown. So welcome to this special Congress in Context edition of our Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
Our mission today, as always, is to cut through the incredible amount of noise and just decode the congressional record for you. And today we're looking at Wednesday, May 13th, 2026.
Exactly. We are digging into the floor debates, committee actions, and key votes from both the House and the Senate. The goal here is really to figure out what your lawmakers are actually arguing over, right? Looking past all those quick sound bites to understand the machinery of how things get done, or deliberately don't get done, and obviously what that means for you.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because looking through the record, there is a massive tension between the illusion of legislative action and the reality of electoral messaging. And honestly, nowhere was that more obvious this week than in the debate over, kitchen table economics.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about the anxiety surrounding soaring gas prices, which directly drove a really highly complex legislative maneuver on the House floor regarding ethanol.
Yeah, and the debate really crystallized around this one speech by Representative Latimer of New York. He painted a very stark, statistically dense picture of what constituents are facing at the pump right now.
Right, because everyone is feeling it.
Exactly. He noted that gas prices in his district jumped from $4.19 to $4.79 a gallon in just 50 days.
Wow.
Which is a 15% increase, right? And he pointed directly to across-the-board tariffs and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz since January 2025 as the primary culprits there.
I mean, that is the kind of sudden jump that changes a family budget overnight. So the economic anxiety is clearly very real. And the House's response was a vote on H.R. 1346, which is the Nationwide Consumer and Fuel Retailer Choice Act of 2025.
Right, the E15 bill.
Exactly. The core function here is allowing the year-round sale of E15 ethanol, which, blends 15% ethanol into gasoline to try and lower those prices at the pump. And it ended up passing the House with a vote of 218 to 203. But here's where I get a bit confused by the strategy.
Okay.
Because I was looking at the procedural history, and House Republicans utilized a specific rule, H.R.S. 1274, to actively decouple this E15 legislation from the massive farm bill. To me, that makes no sense. If you actually want this E15 provision to become law, why intentionally strip it out of a giant must-pass agricultural package? It's like detaching a single train car from a moving locomotive, knowing it might just stall out on its own.
Well, what's fascinating here is that you're looking at this as a legislative strategy when it is actually an electoral strategy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Here is how procedural leverage works in the House. When you package bills together, like tucking E15 into the Farm Bill, you force compromises. So, a member might personally dislike the E15 provision, but they will vote for the overall Farm Bill anyway.
Right, because it has stuff they need.
Exactly, because it contains vital agricultural subsidies for their home state. It provides political cover.
Okay, so it's basically like splitting a restaurant check.
Yeah.
When a giant group of 20 people shares one massive bill, nobody really argues over who ordered the extra appetizer. It just kind of gets buried in the total.
That is a perfect way to look at it. But by using the Rules Committee to decouple the E15 bill, they forced a separate check just for that one appetizer. They forced every member of the House to take a difficult, highly visible up or down vote on a single issue.
But doesn't that just kill its chances in the Senate? I mean, Representative McGovern of Massachusetts was on the floor hammering this exact move.
Right.
He cited USDA data pointing out that the bill was now completely unoffset.
Yeah, and let's define what McGovern means there, because it is crucial to why this bill is likely doomed.
Okay.
In congressional terms, unoffset means they didn't write in any tax hikes or spending cuts elsewhere to pay for it. McGovern noted this unoffset bill would add $2.7 billion to the deficit.
Ouch.
Yeah, and in the Senate, passing unoffset legislation of that size usually violates pay-as-you-go or pay-as-you-go rules, meaning it would require a 60-vote supermajority to bypass. And the architects of this decoupling, they know that.
Wait, so they intentionally attached this E15 provision, knowing that making it an unoffset standalone bill essentially ensures it derails on the Senate tracks.
Exactly, because the strategy here isn't necessarily about getting the president to sign H.R. 1346 into law this week. It is about forcing opponents to go on the record voting against a measure that is politically labeled as a gas price reduction.
Oh, I see.
It's a messaging strategy. It's designed so that in the next election cycle, campaign ads can just say, Representative X voted against lowering your gas prices.
Wow. That dynamic forcing a vote, might stall out just to get your opponents on the record.
Yeah.
I mean, that isn't just happening with economic policy. We saw the exact same messaging strategy applied to domestic security this week, too.
We did.
Because it was National Police Week, which naturally brought some very solemn tributes to the House floor.
Yeah, we saw some moving bipartisan tributes right off the bat. Representative De La Cruz of Texas honored state troopers Juan Zuniga and Roman Gonzalez, really praising their long service records and military backgrounds.
Right.
And Representative Vasquez of New Mexico gave a very moving floor speech dedicated to fallen Deputy Sheriff Antonio Elliman, who tragically died in an on-duty crash. Those moments really reflect a unified respect for the badge that you honestly rarely see get national media coverage.
But then, the House moved to debate H.Con.Res 96, which is a resolution expressing support for law enforcement officers, and that consensus just fractured completely. It ultimately passed 243 to 173.
Yeah, it got messy.
Now, obviously, we have to point out that depending on where you sit politically, this document is either read as a vital shield for local police or an exclusionary weaponized partisan trap. And our job today is not to declare who is right or endorse either view. We're just looking at the mechanics of how both sides are using what looks like a basic thank you note as political ammunition. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Wait, how does a ceremonial resolution become a proxy war?
It is a fascinating proxy war. So Representatives Biggs of Arizona and Nunn of Iowa championed the resolution. Their argument was that Congress needs to take a definitive stand with police against local municipal policies like altered bail standards or reduced funding that they argue are making American cities less safe.
Okay, and conversely, Representatives Raskin of Maryland and McBath of Georgia fiercely opposed the resolution. They argued it was drafted with intentionally exclusionary language.
Right.
Specifically, they noted that the text omitted honors for the officers who defended the Capitol on January 6th.
Right.
But wait, let me parse that for a second.
Mm.
H.Con.Res 96 is a concurrent resolution. It doesn't actually change any laws or allocate any funding, right?
Right.
It is purely ceremonial. So why spend so much floor time fighting over a ceremonial document?
Because in the modern Congress, there is almost no such thing as a simple resolution. Non-binding resolutions are frequently drafted as messaging documents. The Rules Committee allocates their precious floor time for these specifically to force opponents into uncomfortable voting positions.
Interesting.
It reflects the deep divide over the very definition of law and order. If you vote against it because you object to the omitted language, well, your opponent will run an ad saying you voted against supporting the police.
It's the E15 restaurant check strategy all over again, just applied to law enforcement. And we saw this spill over into debates on actual binding legislation this week, too.
We did. The messaging from the resolution tied directly into the debate over H.R. 7711, which is Representative Ross's No Rewards for January 6 Rioters Act, and H.R. 6260, the Keeping Violent Offenders Off Our Streets Act.
Yeah, on that second one, H.R. 6260, Democrats like Representative Johnson of Texas were arguing that the bill essentially criminalizes poverty. The legislation attacks charitable bail funds, and Johnson's argument was that wealth shouldn't determine pretrial freedom, whereas proponents argue those funds release dangerous individuals back into communities.
Exactly. It highlights how a broader theme, community safety, is aggressively legislated from two entirely different foundational philosophies.
So we are seeing this playbook used for domestic policy, both economic and physical security. But then I saw it pop up in foreign policy this week, too, leading to a massive clash over the president's military actions abroad.
Yeah, we saw this play out with H.Con.Res 75. This is a war powers resolution introduced by Representative Gottheimer of New Jersey, and it directs the president to remove U.S. armed forces from hostilities with the Islamic Republic of Iran.
And the floor debate on this was intense. Representative Meeks of New York forcefully argued for the resolution, pointing out that the Constitution requires the president to brief Congress and secure an authorization for use of military force, or an AUMF.
Right.
And he actually looped it right back to our first topic, noting the economic fallout of the conflict, pointing out that gas was topping $4 a gallon in Houston, the energy capital of the world.
And then on the other side of the aisle, Representative Mast of Florida strongly opposed the resolution. His core argument rested on the assertion that Iran represents an imminent threat to the United States and that forcing a troop withdrawal right now would project weakness on the global stage.
Which is a huge debate.
Definitely. We also saw a mirror image of this debate happening over in the Senate, with Senator Merkley pushing a similar resolution and facing intense opposition from Senator Barrasso.
Look, I think you, listening to this, probably know the basic Article 1 versus Article 2 tug-of-war. The founders gave Congress the power to declare war and fund the military while making the president the commander-in-chief. What I want to understand is the mechanics of this imminent threat loophole. If the military is already actively engaged in a region, how does Congress actually pull the purse strings without effectively abandoning troops in the field? It feels like a co-pilot trying to pull the emergency brake while the pilot is already flying the plane.
That is the ultimate political tightrope. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it requires looking at the War Powers Resolution of 1973.
Okay.
That law was designed to check executive overreach by requiring the president to withdraw troops after 60 days if Congress hasn't granted an AUMF or formally declared war.
Right, the 60-day clock.
Exactly. However, executive branch lawyers across multiple administrations have utilized the legal justification of an imminent threat to take immediate military action, completely bypassing the need for prior congressional approval.
So they use the concept of an immediate crisis to start the clock on their own terms.
Precisely. And the mechanical problem for Congress is that modern warfare doesn't operate on a 60-day clock. I mean, in 1973, deploying a battalion took weeks of logistics. Today, the executive branch can launch a devastating cyber attack or authorize a drone swarm in minutes.
Right.
By the time Congress drafts a resolution, debates it in committee, and gets it to the floor, the military reality on the ground has already completely shifted. Attempting to defund an operation that is already weeks underway opens lawmakers to accusations of not supporting the troops, which is why these war powers resolutions often function more as a warning flare from the legislative branch rather than a hard brake on executive action.
It is genuinely fascinating to see how a law written during the Vietnam era is just straining under the weight of 2026 technology. Now, while the House was locked in these messaging wars and warning flares, the Senate ledger actually featured some incredibly consequential binding actions checking the executive branch's power over the economy.
The Senate had a very busy week of oversight. First off, they confirmed Kevin Warsh as the new chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System.
That is massive. The Fed chair has immense influence over interest rates and those kitchen table economics we started the deep dive with, and the vote was tight. 54 to 45.
It really highlights how contentious economic policy remains right now. But the Senate also utilized a fascinating procedural tool this week called the Congressional Review Act, or the CRA.
Yeah, I was looking into this. There was a motion to proceed on H.Con.Res 132.
Yeah.
Can you break down what a motion to proceed is in this context and how the CRA actually works?
Absolutely. So federal agencies like the EPA or the FDA, they constantly create new rules that carry the force of law. The Congressional Review Act is a powerful oversight mechanism that allows Congress to fast-track a vote to overturn those agency rules. A motion to proceed is essentially the Senate voting on whether they even want to officially begin debating the resolution. Under the CRA, this motion is privileged, meaning it bypasses the usual filibuster rules and only requires a simple majority to advance.
And in this specific case, H.Con.Res 132 was aimed at overturning a rule created by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. The rule was originally designed to protect active duty service members from certain financial risks and predatory lending.
Yes. But the motion to proceed failed in an incredibly narrow 48 to 52 vote. Because it failed, the Senate will not debate overturning the rule, meaning the CFPB protections for service members stay in place.
It just shows how a technical, fast-track procedural vote can have massive real-world implications for military families. But the piece of Senate business that really caught my eye brings us right back to our opening hook. Senator Kennedy introduced S.Res 526, which is a bill designed to withhold senators' pay if a government shutdown occurs. Now, it sounds like a great accountability measure, but reading the text, the pay withholding cannot take effect until after the midterm elections. Are they just giving themselves a convenient loophole to sound tough while avoiding the financial consequences today?
Well, this raises an important question, and it's completely understandable why it looks like a loophole. But it is actually a strict constitutional requirement. Senator Kennedy was adhering to the 27th Amendment.
Oh, this is James Madison's ghost.
Yeah.
The rule from 1789 that wasn't ratified until 1992.
That's the one. The 27th Amendment explicitly states that any law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives cannot take effect until an election of representatives has intervened. The logic Madison used was that lawmakers shouldn't be able to give themselves a raise during their current term. But the inverse is also legally true. Congress literally cannot change its own pay, even to punish itself by withholding it during a shutdown, until the voters have had a chance to weigh in at the ballot box. It ensures electoral accountability before any financial changes occur.
So even when Congress tries to punish itself, the Constitution forces them to wait. I honestly love that detail. But, amidst all these high-stakes constitutional showdowns over war powers and Federal Reserve confirmations, the Congressional Record also reveals a deeply human, incredibly local side to these lawmakers.
Yeah, if you read the morning hour speeches, they act almost like a diary of the nation. It grounds the abstract work of Congress in everyday American life.
It's quite the contrast. Like, you flip the page from a debate on the Iranian conflict, and suddenly Representative Fox of North Carolina is on the floor celebrating the 175th anniversary of the Alpha Delta Pi sorority.
Right.
Or you have Representative Bean of Florida sharing a deeply personal story for Skin Cancer Awareness Month. He was urging listeners to get checked, recounting how a colleague happened to spot a dangerous mark on him while they were just walking the halls of the legislature.
We also had Representative Moore of Utah recounting the 26th annual congressional basketball game.
Oh, man.
Yeah, he gave a floor speech lamenting that the members of Congress, who he cheekily referred to as the good guys, suffered a heartbreaking 50-48 loss to the lobbyists, who he jokingly called the bad guys.
Naturally.
But the core of his speech was highlighting that the event raised substantial money for local children in the community.
I just have to laugh at the visual. It is hard to imagine these politicians putting aside the War Powers Act to throw elbows in the paint with corporate lobbyists. But I have to ask, does this local, personal stuff actually matter to the legislative process? Or is it just filler to keep the cameras rolling?
Oh, it matters immensely. Those seemingly trivial moments are the glue of Congress. Yes, because the national media naturally focuses on the partisan wars, the decoupled bills, and the high-stakes messaging votes. But those local shout-outs and charity basketball games are crucial for building the interpersonal relationships required to eventually pass actual, binding, bipartisan legislation.
That makes sense.
You cannot negotiate a trillion-dollar agricultural package with someone you see solely as a political enemy. You have to see them as a human being. It reminds us that these lawmakers aren't just avatars for political parties, they represent specific, real-world communities.
So what does this all mean for you, listening right now? If we look at the through line of this session, everything is connected. The price of gas in your specific town dictates the fierce procedural battles over ethanol in the House. Your community's definition of safety dictates the wording of a Police Week resolution. And the shifting landscape of global conflicts directly impacts your wallet, forcing debates over who actually has the constitutional power to send troops into harm's way. Participating in this democracy goes far beyond just casting a ballot every 2 years. You could read the actual text of H.R. 1346, the E-15 bill, or H.Con.Res 75, the War Powers Resolution, by visiting congress.gov. You can track exactly how your specific representatives voted on the Fed chair confirmation, or that close 48-52 CRA vote on service member protections. And if you agree or disagree with the messaging strategies they're using, call their local offices. Let them know you understand how the machinery works.
And as you watch this machinery operate, think about the shifting nature of the conflicts Congress is trying to regulate. We talked about how the War Powers Resolution of 1973 is struggling to keep up with a world of cyber attacks and economic sanctions. When a president can initiate a devastating action in minutes, the old 60-day congressional clock seems almost irrelevant.
Which leaves us with this final question for you to mull over. When the nature of conflict evolves faster than the law, who really holds the power to define what war means in the 21st century? And if you were sitting in that chamber, how would you rewrite those rules to keep the executive branch in check? Keep looking under the hood of how your government operates. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.